Okay, so this is section 2, implementing and managing Microsoft Threat Protection. My name is Ed Fisher, and while currently I'm a Teams TS, I spent the last couple of years as a security and compliance, and before that, a Threat TS. Been with Microsoft about 10 years, and I'm a co-author of the MS Press exam ref for this particular exam. So hopefully these tips and tricks that I'm going to share will be very helpful to you. There's some good tips for the overall exam, but particularly this section. Don't forget that we just went through some name changes. Don't get hung up on those name changes. Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection, Microsoft Defender, you're going to find documentation online that uses one or the other, sometimes even both names. In January 2021, the exam is being updated to reflect the new naming, but don't be surprised if you come in contact with a question or two that still uses the old naming. Be familiar with both. Don't worry about it if you see one that you're not expecting. It's not trying to trip you up. This is how things go when products' names change. Also, keep in mind the Attack Simulator V2 is now generally available, which means you may have questions on the exam regarding the Attack Simulator V2. And there are some differences between V2 and V1, so make sure you're familiar with both. Nothing is going to beat hands-on experience for a large amount of the content in this section of the exam. If you can get a trial or a test tenant or get your hands on a production tenant, walking through the consoles, clicking on things, seeing where and how things are done, paying particular attention to the order in which they are done will be invaluable to helping you pass this exam. There are some differences between what you can do on premises and what you can do in the cloud, both with Microsoft Defender for Identity and Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So pay close attention to the differences, understanding which you can and cannot do depending upon where a user identity or a mailbox happens to be. Also, while the exam may not be updated for a while after January of 2021, it's always a great idea to check out the latest exam outline. Timing your exam scheduling based on what you've studied, when the next updates are going to come into play, will be very helpful. Exams can be updated all the time. They do publish what's coming. You can see the differences between them in the exam outline. It'd be a really good idea to go through that as you're getting ready to prep for and schedule the exam. So if we jump right into the content, the first section is about enterprise hybrid threat. And really, that's all about Microsoft Defender for Identity, the product that used to be called Azure Advanced Threat Protection. A couple of sections around this, including the planning, the implementing, the monitoring. Pay attention, spend some time in the planning. The prerequisites, the operating system capabilities, the network protocols that you need to have open for communication. Looking at the agents and when you may do a standalone versus an agent, a regular service account versus a group managed service account. Knowing the differences, when which is appropriate, the operating system requirements for each will be very useful to you in prepping for this exam. You want to pay a lot of attention to things such as the sizing tool, why you would run that, what it's designed to do, what type of account and what operating system requirements are there for using a particular account, and again, the sensor deployments, whether you use the sensor or the standalone sensor. Finally, you want to look at permissions. There are built-in roles. Those are managed through Azure and group management. You're going to want to know which of those roles can do what. More importantly, sometimes what certain roles cannot do, and also how to monitor Microsoft Defender for Identity to make sure that it is healthy, that it is reporting, that all of the agents are checking in, where you go to do that within the portal, how you do things. Also take a look at what you can see within the old Microsoft Defender for Identity portal and the new integration capability both with MCAS and with what used to be called Microsoft Threat Protection, now the security.microsoft.com portal and Microsoft XDR. Next, we move into implementing device threat protection, and this is, of course, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, or what we used to call Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. Looking at the planning, be sure you're familiar with the capabilities both across our own operating systems all the way back to legacy, as well as non-Microsoft operating system, whether those are desktop or mobile capabilities. Know what you can and cannot do in a Windows version, for a Mac, for a Linux, for a mobile device. Pay attention to the prereqs that are involved, if there's any updates, any patches that are involved. Spend time going through and understanding the deployment options between manually installing, using root policy, using an MDM, the differences between persistent and non-persistent VDIs. You'll want to understand those deployment options and which you would want to use and when you would want to use them. You'll also want to go through the management portal. And this is where I'm going to emphasize hands-on experience is going to be very important here. You don't necessarily have to manage hundreds or thousands of endpoints, but you should be very comfortable walking through the portal, knowing what capabilities are exposed in each blade, knowing where you would need to go, and in setting things up, understanding the order of operations. Think about if you were asked to accomplish a particular task, the steps in order that you would need to arrange them in order to accomplish those tasks. Nothing's going to be walking through the console and actually going through and doing those in terms of helping you address those sorts of questions. Also, while Microsoft Defender for Endpoint can work with third-party antivirus solutions, there are some limitations. There are some pros and cons to each capability between using our own Microsoft Defender antivirus or working with third-party. So do go through those, make sure you're familiar with them, particularly what you would want to do with Microsoft Defender antivirus if you were still going to use a third-party antivirus as that first EPP capability. Finally, from a monitoring perspective, again, go through the console. Look at advanced hunting. Be familiar with the syntax or the order in which a query. You won't necessarily have to write a query from scratch, but you should be able to, given 2 or 3 queries, recognize which one is trying to accomplish a particular task. Looking at the format and filling in the blanks from a choice or a multiple choice approach. So going through, looking at some of the queries that are in GitHub, some of the saved queries that may be in a tenant you have access to, will be very valuable there. Also go through threat and vulnerability management. See what you can see with machines with regards to first party or third party. Know about how threat and vulnerability management can lead to remediation with Intune or not with other products. And look at all of the reports. Be sure you're familiar with what's included, what's there, which reports expose what information and how you can get to them, so that if you're asked questions having to do with how would an administrator of the Contoso Corporation go about identifying X, you would have a good feel for which report or reports would provide that information to the administrator. Then we move into device and application protection, and really this is all around Windows 10 and the operating systems. You're going to want to make sure that you're familiar with the differences between Windows 10 Pro and Windows 10 Enterprise. Or to put it another way, Windows E3 versus Windows E5 licensing. Know BitLocker, know its capabilities, know how to manage it. Look at credential protection and EDR. Pay really close attention to secure boot, TPM, both software and hardware requirements to accommodate having secure boot. You will want to know the differences between the particular TPM versions, at least at a high level, so that you can recognize whether a particular scenario meets a requirement or does not, and how you might want to redress that. Okay. Then we move into Microsoft Defender for Office 365, or what I would have called Office 365 ATP. My own exam experience, talking to others who have taken the exam, within this 20 to 25%, maybe as much as 75% of the questions in this one section were all around Microsoft Defender for Office 365, again, from my own experience and every other person I've talked to about this. So this is really what I would spend my most time focusing on. Within Microsoft Defender for Office 365, we run into the fact that it's the only product within the Defenders where there are multiple plans. So know what comes in Plan 1. Know the additional capabilities that come with Plan 2. Know what licensed vehicles are out there to obtain Plan 1 or Plan 2, what's included, how you can get it, so that you're really familiar with what those capabilities are. And that latest new capability, Safe Documents, make sure you understand the requirements there. That's a full E5 or an E5 security. You need the endpoint licensing capability It's not just there within Microsoft Defender for Office 365 if that's the only licensing that you happen to have there. Go through the setup of safe links, safe attachments, the anti-phishing capabilities. Really go through and click through them, focusing on the order of operations. If you are asked a question, what are the steps you would take in order to, if you did it this way, would this meet the requirements? You really want to be comfortable with the steps in order so that you can either drag and drop or recognize that one process would or would not particularly work. So the only way you're really going to be able to do that is to click through them. When it comes to safe attachments, you really want to know the options and what you can do between monitor, block, replace, dynamic delivery. Pay attention to each of those and be able to understand and explain the differences between them, or again, recognize if a particular setup meets the requirements of a scenario-based question. You'll also want to spend some time within submissions, both admin submissions and user submissions. Being able to look at submissions, what actions you can take there, the reporting, understanding what Zap does, or with the case of on-prem mailboxes, why it can't do things with on-prem mailboxes, seeing what message traces can do. Really spend some time going through submissions and making sure you're comfortable with what's there, what the capabilities are as an admin, what the experience is as a user. You'll also want to take a lot of time, in my opinion, to go through both Attack Simulator V1, which is in the Security and Compliance portal, and Attack Simulator V2, which is in the new security.microsoft.com. V2 is, again, generally available now, but V1 is still there, and there are some differences. So walking through and actually conducting some attack campaigns in both, again, paying attention to the order of operations, would be very beneficial to you for either, again, those drag and drop in order type questions, or recognizing if a particular set of steps meets a requirement or accomplishes a task that's assigned. Do go through both. Make sure you understand how to track the results. The last section, and probably the least amount of information within the section, is going to be around using Microsoft 365 with Azure Sentinel. This is where you'll probably spend more time reading and less time in that hands-on capability, simply because of the limitations of what you can set up, what you can do, what you can easily accommodate. With Azure Sentinel, you do have some capabilities that are built in to monitor Office 365. There are playbooks, there's monitoring capabilities, how to respond to threats. Take a look at what information you can bring in from Office 365 at no additional charge. Pay attention to the reports that are there, the playbooks that are in there, and get a feel for where an organization might benefit from moving from just the alerting and reporting that's in Office 365 to integrating within Azure Sentinel, and what additional capabilities might be there, including correlation from other sources, the ability to trigger more advanced automated responses, playbooks, etc. Frankly, in this part of the exam, I did next to nothing in hands-on. This was all just reading the initial docs. The links are in the speaker notes that you'll have access to in this deck. That, I feel, will probably take you through as much as you need to get through this section of the exam. So, for the Defender suite of products, hands-on. Work your way through the products, work your way through the capabilities. Make sure you read the docs. Links are in this deck. Be prepared for questions that will either ask you to look at something that's been done and decide whether or not it meets the requirements, or more likely, drag and drop operations so that things are done in a particular order to make sure you know the order you need to go through to set up policies or configure settings. Go through that, you should be in pretty good shape for this exam. Hope this section was useful to you. Good luck.